In the week since its release, the trailer for Amazon's upcoming Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, has created very little in the way of actual enthusiasm for the series, and none are less enthusiastic than the fans of Tolkien, aka the ones who should have been the built-in audience. Alas, the generic fantasy imagery and the extreme liberties taken just didn't go down all that well. Someone else who might not have approved if he had seen it is Tolkien himself. Now granted, Tolkien himself died half a century ago, and he never lived to see even Peter Jackson's interpretation of his work, let alone Amazon's, so we can't know for certain what he would have thought. But he did give feedback on a movie adaptation that was attempted in the late 1950s, and based on that feedback, I don't think it would be unfair to surmise that Tolkien himself would have rejected what Amazon appeared to be doing with his work. In this editorial, I will run through what is known about this earlier movie adaptation, the notes Tolkien provided on it, and what the lessons from that suggests he might have thought about Amazon's upcoming series. Before we begin, kudos to Bounding into Comics, whose February 16th article, Tolkien torched a Lord of the Rings film treatment for being treated carelessly, recklessly, and showing no evident signs of any appreciation of what it is all about, inspired me to make this video, as it was that article that pointed out the existence of Tolkien Letter 210 to me. That is the letter Tolkien wrote to Forrest J. Ackerman in June of 1958. In which he gives his notes on the script to the then in development film version of Lord of the Rings. There are actually a number of proposed Tolkien adaptations that never happened, but this is one of the first, if not the first. In 1956, shortly after the release of the novel The Return of the King, Tolkien was approached by American agent Forrest J. Ackerman about his team producing a feature adaptation of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. The pitch was for just one movie though, a 3-hour feature with 2 intermissions, and it was to be a live-action feature film with animated elements and miniature work. A 55-page outline providing the general direction they were going had been written by Morton Grady Zimmerman, who was technically an amateur, as he wasn't a working or even established screenwriter. Accompanying the pitch was concept art from Ron Cobb, who would later go on to be one of the industry greats, working on both Alien and Conan the Barbarian, among many, many other things. Tolkien was impressed by Cobb's artwork, and he was generally respectful as a movie had the potential to be very lucrative for both him and for his publisher. But he had a hard time concealing how disappointed he was with Zimmerman's script. While the script is in the Tolkien collection, few on the outside have read it, but its contents can be surmised from Tolkien's response to it, which can be found in Tolkien Letter 210. The letter he sent to Ackerman about his misgivings about Zimmerman's script. And by the sounds of it, that criticism could equally well be applied to what Amazon are doing. Towards the beginning of the letter to Ackerman, Tolkien preemptively apologizes for his tone, saying that if Zimmerman were to read his letter, he may be irritated or aggrieved by the tone of many of Tolkien's criticisms. For which Tolkien, in not so many words, was sorry, but not sorry. Instead, he urged them to see it from his point of view, saying, "I would ask them to make an effort of imagination sufficient to understand the irritation and, on occasion, the resentment of an author who finds, increasingly as he proceeds, his work treated as it would seem carelessly in general, in places recklessly, and with no evident signs of any appreciation of what it is all about." And remember, this isn't just any random author, this is Tolkien, one of the single greatest authors who ever lived. He had been meticulous about not just crafting every last aspect of the story, but about each and every word and sentence used to describe it. And so he did not care for the story being carelessly altered for the screen, writing, The canons of narrative in any medium cannot be wholly different, and the failure of poor films is often precisely in exaggeration and in the intrusion of unwarranted matter owing to not perceiving where the core of the original lies. As for how Zimmerman, the screenwriter, had proceeded to alter his work, Tolkien wrote, "He has cut the parts of the story upon which its characteristic and peculiar tone principally depends, showing a preference for fights, and he has made no serious attempt to represent the heart of the tale adequately, the journey of the ring-bearers. The last and most important part of this has, and it is not too strong a word, simply been murdered." That's strong words coming from an author. In not so many words, he says that Zimmerman murdered his story. And by the looks of it, the details about his notes on Zimmerman's adaptation are equally applicable to Amazon. What is clear from letter 210 is that Tolkien was absolutely of the opinion that any adaptation of his work had to be faithful to his work. And he was, if anything, even more passionate about that than even his biggest of fans. Tolkien wasn't unfair. He knew not everything could be adapted in one 3-hour film. And so he had no issues with certain characters and story elements not making the cut. But he felt very strongly that those who did make the cut be done right, i.e. his way. And he had very little tolerance for any kind of deviance from that. Case in point, in Zimmerman's script, Gandalf's fireworks is described as including firework flags and firework hobbits, none of which Tolkien appreciated, and presumably when it was set off without his permission, Gandalf was described as spluttering, to which Tolkien responded, "Gandalf, please, should not splutter." Though he may seem testy at times, has a sense of humor, and adopts a somewhat avuncular attitude to hobbits, he is a person of high and noble authority and great dignity. J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay appear to have changed things away from Tolkien quite dramatically and in far more fundamental ways than Gandalf spluttering. They have not merely been open about how they've changed things up, they appear to take great pride in it. You will recall they told Vanity Fair, "If you are true to the exact letter of the law, you are going to be telling a story in which your human characters are dying off every season because you're jumping 200 years in time. And then you're not meeting really big, important canon characters until season 4. Look, there might be some fans who want us to do a documentary of Middle-earth, but we're going to tell one story that unites all these things." This to me sounds like just the kind of talk Tolkien would not have responded well to. When he wrote the story with these time jumps, he did it for a reason. Perhaps focusing each season on one set of characters, then flash forward a few centuries really would have been the way to go. Skilled writers would have no trouble doing that, not with the elves as connective tissue. But these writers had what they consider a better way, and so did Zimmerman back in the day. He wanted to change the time frame in which The Lord of the Rings took place as well. About that, Tolkien said, "The book begins in September and ends in the following March, and he could see no reason why the timetable be hurried unnecessarily. I cannot see why definite time statements, contrary to the book and to probability, should be made." He pointed out that with the changes to the timescale, the seasonal progression no longer makes sense. The snowstorm on Caradhras would take place during summer. The Lord of the Rings may be a fairy story, but it takes place in the northern hemisphere of this Earth. Miles are miles, days are days, and weather is weather. Zimmerman didn't recognize that in making his adaptation, he had ruined a work in which nothing was random. Nothing was coincidental, and this is true for the appendices as well, which is what this story that Amazon is doing is based upon. About Zimmerman personally, Tolkien said, "I should say Zimmerman, the constructor of this script, is quite incapable of excerpting or adapting the spoken words of the book. He is hasty, insensitive, and impertinent. He does not read books. It seems to me evident that he has skimmed through The Lord of the Rings at a great pace, and then constructed his script from partly confused memories, and with a minimum of references back to the original. He concludes his characterization of Zimmerman by saying, "I feel very unhappy about the extreme silliness and incompetence of Zimmerman and his complete lack of respect for the original. It seems willfully wrong, without discernible technical reasons at nearly every point. The Zimmerman script was never filmed, and the world is probably better off for it. No such luck with the Amazon series. We're getting 5 seasons of showrunners J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay's Rings of Power. I'm inclined to believe that if Tolkien had came back to life to see what Amazon are doing with his work, he'd have died again. But that's just my guess. What do you think? Let me know in the comments.